My name is Michael Creek, and I'll be your facilitator for this half an hour. I say a lively session. We're going to be talking about translating promising research into sustainable business. So how do you scale up a concept from lab to market? And a lively session because EF, in his introduction to the Congress yesterday, suggested that we create a bit of chaos. And so we're going to be creating a little bit of chaos of our own in the form of a fishbowl. As you can see, I have 5 seats empty in front of me. And so this is not a normal session. There'll be no PowerPoints and no Q&A with the panel. Instead, we will be inviting you up to join the fishbowl and have this conversation with us. We've hand-selected 2 fish to join us to begin with. We've very kindly agreed to participate, but after 10 minutes, I'll be opening up the fishbowl to you, the rest of you, because we know that this is a topic. Well, actually, maybe I can ask for a show of hands. How many of you have worked on a project scaling up a concept from lab to market, or some aspect of it? Have you worked on this kind of scaling up project? Okay, yeah, some expertise in the room. Great, so it will be interesting to hear your input. We can invite you into the conversation to share what you've worked on, the challenges you found, and the solutions that you came up with. So the 2 fish that we're going to invite into the bowl have been working on the NanoPack project. And this is a project which you might have already come across in the conference so far. We presented it, Esther presented yesterday the outcomes of the NanoPack project, which is nearing its end. It's a European-funded project. We have the booth right here in the middle of the conference. And we just had a session as well on toxicology and safety of NanoPack. In case you didn't catch it, you can find out more at the booth, but NanoPack is a European project developing and demonstrating the effectiveness of halloysite nanotubes as a way of increasing shelf life in food packaging by releasing essential oils which have antimicrobial properties, thereby having some quite significant effects on shelf life, increasing the shelf life of, inhibiting mold growth in bread, for example, to up to 3 weeks, at least 3 weeks, extending the shelf life. So an interesting product, which is, and in fact, scalability was at the heart of NanoPack as well, as we'll hear from our 2 fish. And maybe I can invite you in, Jeroen and Peter. Round of applause. Jeroen, you are director at EFFoST, the European Federation for Food Science and Technology, which bringing together food scientists and technologists from organizations like universities, research institutes, and associations from across Europe. And you were leading on the sustainability case, the business case for NanoPack as part of the project. And yes, Peter, you very kindly stepped in for Rotem. She was unable to join us. Sadly, she's not been well. But we're delighted that you were able to step in. Peter Mooney, you're leading on innovation at Dawn Meats in Ireland. So big leading food company, meat processor, and supplying restaurants and supermarkets nationally, internationally, across the way. So I want to ask you, we're going to look at this question of, what are the challenges? How do we best address the challenges of scaling up a concept from lab to market? Where can we start? Maybe we can go straight to the money and the cost question. This must be keeping costs down in the process, and particularly a technology like NanoPack, I can imagine, was a huge challenge.
So from a cost point of view, you can do basic research or you can do applied translational research. And in order to do translational research, you need to have a business track going side by side with the basic research track. So the 2 work hand in hand, and sometimes one informs the other and the other way around, and sometimes something commercial happens through the project and you pivot and you move in a different direction as a result of that. So if you do the research in a vacuum, then you end up with IP as opposed to innovation. And if the IP isn't translated or isn't translatable at the end of the day, so the way we work is we say, okay, does it work? Does it work repeatably? Does it scale up? And does it work and scale up at the right cost? And they're the very basic maxims that we use as we go through projects. So we don't start and go for 3 years like a typical traditional research project. We pick points through where we say, is it working, is it not? And I couldn't be in a position personally to go to my CEO in the middle of a project to say, but so it's not working, but we're learning so much, because I'd be told, pick a window, you're leaving, we're not making money, you know, and that's our priority as a company, which is a commercial one. So we have to try and inform the research. So I think Horizon 2020, as we discussed earlier, is a very, very honourable attempt at trying to marry the two instead of the old FP projects, which were like a research project that somebody did a business case in inverted commas beside. And I think that's made a major difference. And for Horizon, it's so from a cost point of view, all of this is built in. But some projects, from a research point of view, you may not even start at the start, because you said it's just going to cost too much. This is one of the fundamentals issues with NanoPack, because we know, because there's technical work involved, it's going to cost more, and also there's going to be a worse LCA if you do an environmental analysis, because it's a more technical project and it has more input into it. And then you have to solve that conundrum where you know there will be an extra cost. So when we work with retailers, it's all about cost neutrality. And they say, okay, if you can't give it to me at the same price, I don't want it. And that is a major impediment in terms of innovation to move product on. And I believe ultimately that the EU are going to have to step in to say, well, you can continue to use that old packaging, but now there's a 40% tariff on this, and here's this new material that we have developed, and there's no tariff on this, and it's the same price, so now it's your choice. Other than that, retailers will continually say, it's too expensive, I don't want it. So cost is a huge issue.
Yeah.
I think I would like to add there that if you look at NanoPack, the goal is to extend shelf life, and with extending shelf life, reducing the food waste. So yes, there is some upcharge in the technical to make the NanoPack, but in the end, it should reduce costs in lowering food waste and extending shelf life. So yes, and like what Peter's saying, we need some actors to make this change happen.
That's it. So yeah, if you can justify the cost in the effectiveness, and maybe that's also a question to ask, because of course moving from lab to market, the effectiveness of what works well in the lab doesn't necessarily work well on industrial scale. How did NanoPack address this challenge?
Yeah, the nice thing of the NanoPack project is that we have all the partners of the value chain within the consortium. So we have the producers of the polyethylene, the film producers, the food companies, and the research institutes. So all together we have been working on how can we upscale this. And of course you run into problems that you haven't foreseen in the lab, but with all the input from the different research partners and the knowledge at the food companies and the packaging producers, that we were able to solve many of the issues that we had and were facing.
Yeah. It's a team effort to some extent. Yeah, it's a huge consortium with NanoPack as well, with lots of expertise. And I want
just to say one thing, the price works different ways for different people. So you have ourselves who work in a very aggressive own label market where only 3% of meat in the UK, for example, is branded. And then you have Arla, who are a branded proposition and a completely different company who operate a different way. So we actually have completely divergent approaches to the same issue in terms of how to make money. So Arla, for example, will take the cost of the technology if they feel that it fits their brand values and it works with them as a company, whereas with us, the margins are so low, we can't build that in, so we have to make a business case to our retail clients, as Jeroen said, to say, well, it's going to be 20% less food waste here. And in our case, the meat is a very high payload from a cost and from a carbon point of view. So there is a point, even though the product is more expensive as a result, because the food waste is, for me, is actually a bigger issue from a sustainability point of view. People are obsessed about plastic, but I think if we could solve food waste, it's such a massive issue, and there's so much food being thrown in the bin these days.
Okay. So yeah, I should say Arla also partners on the NanoPack project, so the importance of having this broad conversation with stakeholders early on in the process.
Not just have industry and research, there are different types of industry and different types of research entities as well.
Absolutely, great. Okay, and another challenge that perhaps we can raise is the question of regulatory issues. This must be something that NanoPack thought about early on in the process. How did this go?
Yeah, we had a nice session this morning with detailed information about where we are at the moment with regulatory issues. Yeah, and it has been a challenge. I think the European Commission is promoting innovation and that we come up with new solutions. On the other hand, we have strict regulations from EFSA in introducing novel packaging or novel ingredients. And one of the challenges that we had is using essential oils. For instance, we are using the nanotubes, which are harvested from mineral clay, which probably is no issue. If we look at the results from the studies that we did, there's no migration of the nanotube to the food, so there's no exposure to the consumer. But if you look at the essential oils, which is commonly used as a flavor ingredient, we ran into the problem that it's not permitted at the moment to use as a technical ingredient. So we are within the allowed daily intake levels of using essential oils, but we still have to get approval to use this in the packaging. If we add it in the food product itself as a flavor, it's not an issue. If we put it in a package, then we have to get approval. So it's, yeah, sometimes, yeah, it's limits the rates of innovations.
Can I ask, what is the secret of working with regulators in developing a project? How can you solve this when you're dealing with these regulatory issues? What advice would you give?
A very sage piece of advice, because when we speak to a lot of people who try to sell us things and technology, quite frequently you get things like, oh, well, it's grass. I'm sorry, I'm in Europe. You know, and there's huge confusion out there about what's legal and what's not. And we frequently get companies trying to sell us things and technology saying that this is legal, not actually knowing that it's not legal, because it's a very complex thing. So we take a very simplistic approach to it, and we say, look, it is what it is. There's the legislation, and we work within that. And we try not to upset ourselves about what we could do if it was grass and we were in the States, because we can't. And we try and work with good people who understand the legislation, as opposed to people who are telling us that something is legal when we're sitting there looking at it going, we know it's not.
So it's finding those solid sources of advice on the legislation. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a couple more points I wanted to make before we open things up, and I hope some of you are already thinking about points you maybe identify with that Peter and Jeroen have raised. Yeah, perhaps you might like to talk a bit about the question of sustainability. This must be something you bear in mind. Again, going from lab to market, there's the question of how do we position this product with the current focus on sustainability. And you've mentioned the issue of food waste as something crucial there.
Yeah, the interesting thing that we saw from the consumer studies is that the consumer doesn't have a problem with using nanotechnology. The funny thing is that the consumers had more problems with using essential oils than that nanotechnology was applied in the packaging. And I think we have to be clear to the consumer that by using plastic, we are trying to lower the footprint by reducing the food waste. So we have to explain in a way to the consumers that not all plastic is bad. And I think that's a difficult message to the consumer. Because now at the moment it's like we have to reduce all plastic packaging. But for some food products, this will be a very difficult challenge. For instance, like the meat with Peter.
So from our point of view, our consumer are the retail customers who we sell to, because the vast majority of our product is own label. So in the UK, say 80% is own label, 16% is loose, unmarked meat, and only 3% is branded. So it never gets to a consumer unless we can make a business case to the retailer. Of course, the retailer is bearing in mind what's happening from a consumer point of view, and that level of research needs to be done to reassure them, apart from the business proposition that we're making to them, that the research, market research has been done, and this is how consumers are reacting to it, because it's a very obvious question that they will ask us. But this goes nowhere unless the retailers themselves can see something in it, but all of this market research is very helpful in that regard.
Great. And before we throw things open, are there any other challenges related to the scaling up of NanoPack that you'd like to raise before we open things up?
Yeah, I think one thing that I would like to raise is the innovation paradox, because we have developed a new packaging material using essential oils, and of course this is not a traditional packaging material. So the essential oil will give a little bit of smell to the package, and that of course is a challenge to get this accepted by food producers to change their current non-smelling packaging material for something that has maybe a bit of off smell. But in the end, I think it's trying to innovate and to come up with new breakthrough packaging material that we have to explain to the end user, the consumer, what the benefits are of using the nanotechnology, and that it's a bit different from what they were used to.
Okay, great. Yeah, lots of what I'm taking for this, it's about opening up these conversations early in the process, listening to consumer needs, talking to retailers about their expectations, and making the case to them for the product. Okay, interesting. I'm ready. I think I'm curious to hear from you as well, to recruit some new fish for this fish bowl. Is there anybody that would like to join the bowl and share some experiences? Anyone that identified with some of the points that we've raised already? Or do I have to recruit you? Has anybody been working on a similar scalability project, scaling up, that would like to explain a bit about what they've been doing or share some ideas? Yeah, come and join us. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is Koranit and I work at Carmel Olefins, which is responsible for Pilot 2 in this NanoPack project. We began in a laboratory scale when we produced 50 grams of a plastic compound in our laboratory compounder. We produced the films in a laboratory compression molding of 5 centimeters diameter films, and afterwards during this project with many steps and evolution of the raw materials and the manufacturing procedure, we managed to arrive to production of 350 kilos of plastic pellets that produced at Carmel Olefins, and later on films were produced at Ciplex, our partners in Pilot 3, with tens of meters and up to 7 layers.
And what were the obstacles you faced in scaling up from this huge scale?
In a laboratory scale, we didn't have any problem. We had, but it was very minor, to compound the plastic pellet with the paste of loaded HNTs. But when we are talking about industrial scale, scaling up the procedure, paste is not acceptable in the procedure. It cannot be compounded easily, if any, with the plastic pellets. So the evolution in the raw materials needed to be made when we needed to receive some sort of pellets that could be fed into our extruder, to the pilot extruder, and be compounded with the plastic pellets of the polyethylene.
Okay. Yeah. So big technical challenges then.
Yes. And also the temperatures during compounding. In order to process plastic, of course everybody here knows you need high temperatures, and so we needed to optimize the procedure and the temperatures and different parameters, so to allow the high retention of the essential oils in the pellets and later on in the plastic film.
Great. Yeah, I'm still keen to fill up our fishbowl to get the conversation going. Does anyone have any questions actually for our fish? Okay, I'm going to have to pick someone out to come and join the bowl at this point. Or, yeah, any points you would like to raise on... are you keen to join us?
Maybe a question.
Sure, come on.
I will have one.
Please come and join us. Yeah,
I wouldn't be experienced enough. But just a general question.
If you take all the challenges that you're facing, and particularly around regulation, I mean, how hopeful in a moderate time period that the NanoPack technology would be actually successful? Because it does seem that you're facing a lot of big challenges.
Regulatory speaking, as mentioned, the essential oils are already approved as food additives. So the European Commission already familiar with these substances that are allowed to be incorporated directly into food. So we are using them, and we just need to clarify their use as active materials. Our migration studies in the films that were produced passed the overall unspecific migrations. So we are in the limit of the migration that was specified by the European Commission. So it's just, we need their decision after we'll submit the dossier that is recently finalized.
Sure.
EFFST is EFFST, and anybody who works in the food business understands that, and things take a certain amount of time. But one of the things that impressed me about the project was that there was a commitment on the part of the partners to actually put forward a proposal to EFFST that was fully elaborated, which may go, I mean, this is the plan, that it will actually go forward as opposed to some kind of a pretend application. And that is a huge thing, because companies who are involved in innovation and talk about the cost of innovation, it's not just the cost of the product. You know it's going to take a certain amount of time to get through the process. You know it has to be very competently done. Personally, I'm a fan of EFFST. I realize things tend to go from one extreme to another, but when you see the questions that they ask, they make perfect sense. It's the standards and the hurdles that they set in terms of the scientific proof to be absolutely sure to answer the question or not is more of an issue for me than the type of questions that they ask. But again, our response is, it is what it is, and if the technology is worthwhile, then everybody should get behind it and support it and put in these applications and see what happens. Even from a scale-up point of view in the factory, I think it's a bit of a, those of us who work in the industrial sphere understand that it's not a question of somebody just giving you some prototype packaging and you'll run off several hundred products with it, and there's a huge scale-up in terms of the effort from a factory point of view to get something that's actually commercial that we can put on a supermarket shelf somewhere. So sometimes with these projects there tends to be a huge emphasis on the research effort, and then at the end there's kind of a prototype material that we do 1 or 2 factory trials. We would love to do dozens of factory trials, because there's a feedback process where you go back to your technical partners then and say, this didn't work, that didn't work, can we have a look at this? And there's a huge scale up. It's, you know, there's a lot of work on the research side, but there's, I would contend there's more work to get a commercial product out of it as well.
Sure, the importance of that, building in that feedback process through every part.
We need to remember that the film acts differently in a petri dish, in a laboratory test, than in food, in a real package.
Sure. Yeah, the challenges that only come up in large-scale production. Okay, recruitment of new fish. Some of you mentioned that you were working on, you are working on scaling up from lab to research. Would you join us and tell us a bit about? Please join us.
Hello everyone, I'm Li Xu from Singapore. Yeah, I'm a scientist working on the polymer materials. In fact, in Singapore, we also have similar consortia. Yeah, to develop some, we call it the high barrier, ocean barrier for the packaging. Yeah, we also transfer the technology to the company. Yeah, we also face some, stock for the upscale production. Yeah, it's very for the laminated film about the bonding strengths. Yeah, my question is that when you have the nice product, how you promote your product to the converter? Yeah, that's my question. Yeah.
Just to make the point that the main reason that we as a large-scale company got involved in this is that we are constantly pushed by our retail partners, is there technology out there? There's a huge issue around packaging. I don't think anybody would quibble with that. Apart from the issue around it, when you look and see what companies are doing, some of it is talk and some of it is very practical work that saves a few kilos here and a few kilos here. And the packaging technology has got to the stage where it's been slimmed down so much, and that process has been going on for years, that it's kind of up against the wall now. So the next question is medium-term research, what's been done out there. And what we've done and what you're doing is just so unusual, and we felt obliged to get on board in the project because there's so little work like this being done. And it's very expensive, and then from a European point of view, we have EFSA, etc. So only with the support of the Commission are we able to do this work. So it's admirable to have it done, because I think if you did a Google search or you did a research search to see the amount of work that's been done out there, medium-term research in packaging to try and improve it, it's actually very little. So we felt an obligation to get on board to work with people to see what could be done. we know ourselves when you work in R&D, a certain percentage of product works, a certain large percentage of product doesn't work. I mean, we know, for example, I was talking to Michael about this earlier, we know that only 5% of US patents are ever commercialized, you know, and there's a reason for that. And we sit on the other end of the spectrum and we're trying to pull things through and we want things to work. So it's not just, you know, it's an aspirational thing as well, because we see the amount of work that's going on out there and we want to get involved with it to pull it through, to test it, to see can we do something with it. So the amount of work that's been done in this area is pitifully small, and it's only thanks to the support of the Singaporean government and to the EU and this large amount of money that's been poured into the project that we're here at all, and that's a shame, because everybody understands there's a huge problem, but when you look at the amount of work that's been done, it doesn't match up to it currently.
I think also adding to your question, how you communicate this to the consumer also depends on the market where you're operating in. We saw from consumer studies that the Chinese and US consumers have a different approach to the issues of recycling and sustainability issues. And for instance, if you look at the Italian consumers, extending the shelf life of fresh produce is not something that they were looking for. So, for instance, the NanoPack technology in Italy would maybe not work because the Italian consumer wants fresh foods, not stored for a week longer. And if you look to the Chinese or US market, it's probably easier to sell the technology because they have a different opinion on recycling and sustainability of packaging.
Just to say that one of the new markets for the meat business in Ireland and in Europe is China, next door to you. And at the minute, it's all frozen. So the big challenge is how can we ship fresh meat to China? So if you can use some intermediate packaging that will get you down there, New Zealand and Australia have far more experience of this shipping into the European market, whereas in our case, after the BSE in the early 90s, a lot of the export markets shut down. So this work in terms of extending shelf life basically stopped, essentially, in Europe, and it continued on in Australia and in New Zealand. So for us, if there's something that we can do to allow us to sell our own product in a different format in different markets. So for example, we're an Irish producer. Brexit is a huge issue for us. You have the British market potentially shutting down. We want as many options as we possibly can for our product. Our factories are going through FDA approval for the States and Chinese approval. And we want new formats to be able to ship new formats of products to those markets.
Thanks very much. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, I wanted to ask a bit as well about the challenge of time to market. I mean, surely that's a factor as well, that the technology that you're developing at one point, then there is a race to get to market to make sure that the technology is still relevant when it finally reaches market. How did NanoPack address this?
I've always said that technology has a shelf life as much as the research does as well, and it only lasts so long. And having worked in innovation or R&D or in business development for years, I remember years ago, for example, we discovered that in a certain market in Asia, that if we shipped milk powder down directly, there was a 140% tariff, but if it was less than 50%, it was only a 40% tariff. So we started making all of these blends of different products, and that lasted a couple of years, and I kept saying to the company, this isn't going to last because everybody else is going to realize what we're doing and it will all catch up with us. So ideas and concepts and research has a certain shelf life. Although the flip of that, to be honest, is that I know some Irish companies in the software business who one of their stated business method is to look at expired patents, to look for good ideas that then they can refresh to go forward into the market again because the patent is out, and they can put a modern twist on it and make sure that it works. So it just depends. Different companies make their money in different ways. But technology has a shelf life as well. And from a product development or an R&D point of view, working in a company, you need a pipeline of things coming through. You know, only a certain percentage of those are going to work. And you can't sit on your laurels for the ones that have worked because they will only work for a certain period of time. And it's a vital aspect. My NPD colleagues, for example, they will do hundreds of new products every year because 60 or 70% of the retail products that they're selling to retailers disappear. you know, the lines only last so long and they disappear, and they're constantly being pushed to produce new products and new products. And there's this rebirth and renewal constantly, and you can't get obsessed about one project. You have to have a range of them.
Great. Any final points or questions before I wrap things up? Sure.
Maybe just some of the panel's thoughts on Horizon 2020 and the importance of that funding to doing projects like this.
Question again, I didn't hear.
Yeah, what do you see as the importance of Horizon 2020 in projects like this? The role of the funder in making sure that kind of lab to market happens?
Yeah, making the bridging the gap between the research and innovation, getting the product on the market, it's a huge gap that sometimes is really difficult to fund and to make the decision to go forward. So Horizon 2020 has made this possible to make this step from the lab to the pilot scale, where there is a huge investment needed to make this. Lab research, of course, is quite an investment, but bringing it to pilot scale is in even bigger investment to make this happening. So I think Horizon 20 is making this possible, but the stress of really innovating and making sure that there are results and products coming out of the project on the market.
Personally, I'm a huge fan of Horizon. I know it was an Irish commissioner at the time who brought the concept through and looked at all of the FP7 programs and said, well, it's not working because we're not seeing an output. And how do we get an output? And for me, without trying to diss it in any way, it's a very honourable attempt, as I said earlier, to move the agenda on in terms of translation and research. I suppose the one major difference between what I do on a daily basis and a Horizon project is that if I will not set out something for 3 years or 5 years. I will pick milestones and work towards those and say, is it okay? Is it still looking okay? We'll do the next piece. We'll do the next piece. I realize that's an incredibly difficult thing to do from a pure research setup because people want to know what they're doing. I can't tell you what I'm doing next week in work, whereas we have researchers who are going, my life needs to be mapped out for the next 2 years and I'm taking somebody on with a PhD and we have to have 4 years work for them. And that is the alien thing to me. Because for me, if I'm running a project, it's either working or it's not, and you're stopping and asking constantly. I think sometimes with the researchers we work for, there's an over-reliance on SOPs and just churning out results, whereas while we're doing it, we're checking and checking, saying, no, it's not working, we need to do something different. And then there's an overemphasis on statistics to make things better once the bent SOP that's not working is producing bad data. So the huge difference between the daily thing that we do and the Horizon projects, and I'm not sure if it's possible to do it, is to pick points through the project to say, are we there yet? Have we shown enough promise to continue further on with the next stage of it? So it's not a criticism because I'm a large fan of it, but if we could do that, I think you would get a lot more output in terms of results.
Thanks. Last word on Horizon 2020?
Well, I think that we can summarize the project in the late time where people say, and Jeroen also mentioned it before, that plastic is bad for the environment. I think that in this project we are harnessing plastic to do good, to make food safer, to extend the shelf life, to avoid food waste. So I really think that we are doing here some sort of, with using plastic, we're trying to do something good for the environment and our planet.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, I'm wrapping this up. I've been trying to take some points so we can have some takeaways from this session. And I think this, making a clear message to ensure the sustainability of the product and tailoring that message to retailers, to consumers, to every stakeholder in the process. We've talked about engaging that conversation early in the process and having feedback points to make sure that the development of the product is responding to this conversation, to this feedback, listening carefully to everyone involved. We talked about having solid sources on regulation. We talked about being aware that technology has a shelf life. So it's not only food products that have a shelf life, but also the technology itself. Yeah, thanks very much to our fish, and thanks to all of you for joining in the conversation. We appreciate it very much. We look forward to seeing you in the NanoPack booth later on to continue the discussion. Thanks a lot.